Hey there. This is a little quick demo on air layering. The technique I use for trees, this is about 2.5, 3-inch trunk right here. On hardwood like this or older wood, I use this. It's a hunting knife with a saw on the back of it. And that's about a $9, $10 cheap old hunting knife that I picked up at one of the local tool discount outlet stores, and that's what I use to clean the bark or to wring the bark around the tree. And as you can see right here, I've got this other branch. Later on, after I take this air layer off, this is going to be my next air layer, so I have to take care not to damage this branch too much. So as you can see, I've already gone around this with that saw, and the weather's coming in. It's getting kind of breezy, kind of overcast. As you can see, that we're between wind gusts right now. So I'll just make this quick and simple. Once I've done that, and because I've got an issue with this branch being in the way, which is a branch I want to use later on to get that part of the tree there, I'll come back with a sharp knife. Doesn't matter what kind of knife. Always keep your finger away from where you're cutting when you're using these knives. As much as possible, let gravity work for you. And clean up the margins right there. There's actually a Japanese tool that cuts in here, and it leaves a jagged edge along the medium where the roots will come out. And the idea there is to give a more uneven approach to the roots that develop from that area, versus like what I'm showing you here, to really come back in here and clean that area up. And as a matter of fact, the teeth on that device looks a lot like these teeth, except you've got almost a plier-like affair that grips and cuts for you. But I'm going to clean this up, and being that that's a saw, you get ridges in here. You don't really need to clean that up because it's going to break up whatever amount of cambium that might remain, and the cambium is what's going to cause your tree to callus over and to heal again. So anyway, I can't really do it with this, but you get the idea. I have to come around here and clean up that area because, again, the wind and the weather seems like it's coming in on me. I'm moving fast, but I would actually take my Sawzall or a chainsaw and trim this knot out. This is an area that I air layered also, and I would clean this up and let it grow back as this tree is still trying to put out roots, and that way I get a lot better healing, a lot faster healing. You can see over here I've already wrapped this with sphagnum moss, plastic, and black electrical tape. And normally I leave this open so I can see roots as they grow, but I'm going to go ahead and cover this up. We're having what I perceive as a cooler spring, and I want that heat to get into the area to help stimulate root growth. And not only will it do that, but it'll keep the moss and anything else from growing in there. You can see on this tree, I've already cleaned this up and cleaned the margins where the bark is, so that I can hopefully get a better regrowth in this area. And like I said, I would do that here, but I'm trying to get this done and out of here before the rain hits me. I've also clipped the ends of this, and because I have nothing new down here or growth on this area already, I'm going to wait until I see some back budding, and then I'll come back here and trim that off again. Normally that's the size of tree that I would actually air layer out, or at the proper time I'd cut it and just root it, stick it, and then root it. But again, because I'm trying to beat the weather, I'm going to forego trimming that area up, and hopefully you can see that. I've done a number of trees already, and you can see here all wrapped up. I've cleaned the stub where I previously air layered this out. In fact, I just moved these two trees here about 3 or 4 months ago. That's right, 3 or 4 months ago I dug them up, and those trunks are no less than 5 inches and 6 inches. This one being 5 inches, that one being 6 inches. And planted those there. I've air layered these over here, and you can see the white plastic, just grocery store bags, shopping bags. But I'm going to go ahead and put something that's opaque, a black plastic over there or whatever, to warm that up. And you can see the top out of that where I cleaned it up a little bit, getting ready for growth. And we'll see how that goes. And I've got another here to show you a different method that I use. Hopefully you can see this. That's a black gallon pot that I've split. And the main reason I'm using this is because this is a small leaf trident maple. And I want to go ahead and get the stump out of here. And I've used soil in this air layer. What I did was, once I ringed the tree, I put a piece of sphagnum moss around the ringed area with rooting hormone on it, and I set that in place, and then I put the soil in. But you can actually put the soil in, fill it up, especially if you've got room and space to work in there. Once you get the pot in place, put the soil in, and then put the moist sphagnum moss in with the rooting hormone around the wound, and then continue to fill the pot above where the sphagnum moss is. The sphagnum will hold moisture in, the roots will grow through the sphagnum into the soil, and boom, Bob's your uncle. You got it done. Here I'm doing some fusion grafts on this same small leaf trident maple. These are standard trident maples. I've got a couple on the ground there, back in that area too. So I've got 4 of these fusions that I'm doing just to get these off of here, so I don't, well, so that I can save as much of this small leaf trident maple as I can. And also I've got a few cuttings that look like they're going to strike successfully. These are really notorious. No matter what season I do, or even the rooting hormone, to this point I've not been super successful. But these have been here since about February, I think. January or February, somewhere in there. And I've got a few that looks viable, but they're really small little fellas, not really even pencil size. And again, more air layers. You can see that air layer right there, and it's on a tree that's substantially tall. That's excuse me, that's about 6-7 feet. But I want that trunk, and I've been promising myself I'll do this because the trunk has nice curves in it. I had an air layer on here before, and it did not take. The birds pecked at it and opened up the plastic, and the sphagnum dried out. And again, another trunk that's got some nice curves in it, and I'll air layer the top out of that. And again, once I'm done with all of this, I'll come back and put black plastic on it. But I need to get these in place first. A multi-trunk air layer, once it takes, I'll start working on that bottom piece there, and I'll grow this top piece for a season or two, and then once it stabilizes, there you have it. I'm going to try to get to this red maple here, and hopefully all of these upper branches, I'll air layer those out, and if I'm successful, depending on how large I want this, I may just go to, I guess you can say, the area right here. You can see that trunk, and that'll be probably almost 4 feet tall as I look at it right here. But again, 1, 2, 3, 4 major trunks. Oh yeah, and another thing about the air layers, when you do air layers, try to air layer things that are growing vertical. You'll get a better success rate when you do that. If you got to do something horizontal, by all means, give it a shot. You know, it's a little more problematic, but I have actually successfully air layered off trees that were pretty well horizontal, not just, you know, going laterally or kind of at an angle anyway. This is a Naruto trident maple. Looks like it's dehydrated, doesn't it? Look at those leaves. And I show you this, and I'm going to try to get to this as soon as possible also. I've got bunches of trees here that I need to air layer. But I've got one of the Narutos in the ground, and every once in a while when I go to water my trees, I look and I think, oh, what's wrong with this tree? Because it's really sandy in this place. And then I think, and I remember, oh, you had the one Naruto that actually rooted from a cutting, and you just stuck it in there, because once you see a Naruto, you'll never forget it, unless you're like me, and you forget that you put a Naruto in the ground. At any rate, label your plants. And if you got a brain like me, if you got plants between -0 and 0, anything above that, label it. But aside from that, you'll be okay. So if you don't have any plants, you don't have to label your plants. But if you got plants, I suggest you label them. That way you don't have to worry about what's going on. See, that's a little Naruto. And I was putting out the water this morning, and I looked at this thing again. I said, well, that thing is so dry. And then after a couple of buckets of water, I remembered, see how lush this looks, how green and beautiful that leaf is? Any one of these along the row here, even with that dry sand, look at that. And I just put wheelbarrows little plastic wheelbarrow full of water out here. You can see where the water passed through there. But all this is just dry. You know, you got some moisture, but it's pretty well dry. So anyway, my point is, label your plants and then you won't have to remember. And if you do remember, good for you. And if you forget, you got your label and you can go back. But that's a Naruto, and that's why that looks so droopy. Because as you can see, all of these trees here, nice and green, they're growing beautifully. And this year, unlike the past several years, I've had these out 4, maybe 5 years now, and usually I just let the weeds grow up in here just to protect the trees from dehydration in the summertime, because I had lots of other projects going on and I just wanted to get those out of the growing pots into the ground, and the weeds would actually protect them from the sun, the blistering heat, especially when the soil was super dry. And all of these plants, if you will, it's April now, toward the end of April, all of these plants until this year weren't even knee-high, you know. They were just little fellas, you know. And now, already I've got growth, you know, up to almost 6 feet in some cases. And, I mean, yeah, most of them are still spindly, but they're doing well. Fertilizer, just a general purpose fertilizer, and weeding, lots of water. Root over rock, kept very moist, so the roots will establish and head on into the soil, harden off. So trident maples, and eventually I got to get around to putting the chainsaw on that crepe myrtle. I still have to decide how many trunks I'm going to have, and this crepe myrtle here, I'm going to be carving some of the dead wood, probably just to make one of these massive up branches, the apex, and then cut all of this greenery back and let it regrow. But again, I've got lots of maples to air layer between now and the time I finished. I would be trying to air layer this today, but it fell over about a week ago in one of the storms. It was recently planted, so I'm going to have to let it set. And back in the back, I've got dozens more of the Japanese green maple and the trident maples, and coral bark and cork bark, and even this tree right here. If I get around to it today or in the next few days, I'm going to air layer stuff out of it. And this tree right here, you can see that stump right there. I air layered that before I moved it here. And I'll be air layering on this. This tree is doing pretty well. That is an air layer itself, about 4 inches at the base. And you can see a pretty nice bifurcation right there, which at this point I'm looking, all of this stuff will be cut back, and that would be the apex, and that would be cut back, new stuff grown in the top. But again, this air layer, I'd be air layering this and that. That was well over 16 feet of air layer from 2017, put in the ground here right at 2018 at the beginning of the year. This tree I'm going to take some air layers out of it at some point. And again, that's about 8 inches at the base, and lots of potential for air layers. But anyway, lots of trees around here to be air layered, and I'm going back to work now. That's juniper and sarissa. I've kind of matched things up that you would think shouldn't be together. Sarissa needs a good amount of water. The juniper technically should be dry. But my thing is, a young juniper requires lots of water. An older juniper, not so much water. So in the growing process, while you're growing your plants, put the water to it. But once the tree gets to a certain age and maturity, then that's when you look at reducing the water amount. That's a pink sarissa, and at some point I need to get it out of that pot and start working with it. That was an air layer, trident maple, and I'm trying to make it into an angular growth. And my mind's eye is to see that about a 5 to 6 foot tree that works an angle. Well, anyway, you can see that tree. See the bottom part from there below the air layer down there? That's about right at about 3 feet. And the side shoot will be reduced some once the tree gets established, and the air layer. Once I cut the air layer off, I'll see how far back I need to cut that side shoot, and that's going to be an entire tree, even if I have to graft rootstock onto that to make it a nice nabari. Because a lot of these trees that I've got actually grew through and out of 1 gallon growing pots, the black growing pots. And so here you have it. All right, I'm going back to work to put that air layer on. Oh, by the way, there's my sphagnum moss, and I've saturated it with infused water, B1 infused water, and the very bag that I'm pulling this sphagnum moss out of is my wrap, my plastic wrap. And again, I use black plastic tape, electrical tape, to secure it with, and then I've got my black plastic right there that eventually I'll cover that up. Alrighty-dighty, there you have it. Boom, Bob's your